Looking back, I can see your fingerprints upon my life, always seeking my best. There were times when your way would make no sense, but as you said, you have never left. You are always good, you are only good, you are always good to me. Though my eyes can't see, help my heart believe, you are always only good.
Looking in, I can see my frailty, my sin is great, and my strength is so small. Still you stay, and your mercy shelters me. You hold my hand, and you hear my call. You are always good, you are only good, you are always good to me.
Though my eyes can't see, help my heart believe, you are always only good. Looking up, I can see your sympathy. I doubt myself, but I'm sure of your love. Lavish grace was poured out at Calvary, securing me for our home above. You are always good, you are only good, you are always good to me. Though my eyes can't see, help my heart believe, you are always only good. You are always good, you are only good, you are always good to me. Though my eyes can't see, help my heart believe, you are always only good. Thank you. Well, I hope that's your testimony as well tonight, that you'd be able to say amen to that and say, that's my experience as well. That no matter what I've been through in life, I have to look back and realize that God is always only good. And even if you can't see that right now, trust in that, because it certainly is the Bible truth. Thankful that He is that. Well, good to be back here again tonight. We are in Leviticus. Yes, I've been enjoying this study. Hope that you've been helped by it as well. Leviticus 13 is where we're going to be tonight, 13 and some of 14. Leviticus 13. I'm going to begin reading in verse 47. And I'm going to go ahead and read a good chunk of this chapter. There's some details here I want you to really tune in and try to capture, try to envision, if you will, and think about this. And we're going to teach on it, and I believe that teaching is going to lead to some preaching as well tonight. So Leviticus 13:47 says, "The garment also that the plague of leprosy is in, whether it be a woolen garment or a linen garment, whether it be in the warp or woof, of linen or of woolen, whether in a skin or in anything made of skin. And if the plague be greenish or reddish in the garment or in the skin, either in the warp or in the woof, or in anything of skin, it is a plague of leprosy, and it shall be showed unto the priest. And the priest shall look upon the plague, and shut up it that hath the plague 7 days. And he shall look on the plague on the seventh day. If the plague be spread in the garment, either in the warp or in the woof, or in a skin, or in any work that is made of skin, the plague is a fretting leprosy. It is unclean. He shall therefore burn that garment, whether warp or woof, in woolen or in linen, or in anything of skin wherein the plague is, for it is a fretting leprosy. It shall be burnt in the fire. And if the priest shall look, and behold, the plague be not spread in the garment, either in the warp or in the woof or in anything of skin, then the priest shall command that they wash the thing wherein the plague is, and he shall shut it up 7 days more. And the priest shall look on the plague after that it is washed, and behold, if the plague have not changed his color, and the plague be not spread, it is unclean. Thou shalt burn it in the fire. It is fret inward, whether it bear within or without. And if the priest look, and behold, the plague be somewhat dark after the washing of it, then he shall rend it out of the garment, or out of the skin, or out of the warp, or out of the woof. And it shall appear, and if it appear still in the garment, either in the warp or in the woof, or in anything of skin, it is a spreading plague. Thou shalt burn that wherein the plague is with fire. And the garment, either warp or woof, or whatsoever thing of skin it be, which thou shalt wash, if the plague be departed from them, then it shall be washed the second time and shall be clean. This is the law of the plague of leprosy in a garment of woolen or linen, either in the warp or woof, or anything of skins, to pronounce it clean or to pronounce it unclean. Now, you might be reading that saying, okay, where are we going tonight, preacher? I'm glad you asked. I'm excited to preach to you tonight on removing the rot. Removing the rot. Let's ask the Lord's blessings one more time. Father, we sure need you tonight, and I do as well. And Lord, I pray that you would speak through me. I know, Lord, that you've got a message here for your people. I pray you'd help us to have the wherewithal to really tune in and to hearken to your word. We know that it is inspired. We know that it is profitable. And so, Lord, would you bless tonight? In Jesus' name, amen. The old saying says, one bad apple spoils the bunch. One bad apple. Take a whole basket of apples, stack them ever so nicely, but if there's one apple in there that's got some rot in it, the rest of the good ones surrounding it are not going to transmit their goodness into the rotten apple. It goes the other way, doesn't it? The rotten one, and whatever is touching it, spreads it to the others. That's basically how uncleanness works in Leviticus. Wherever there was uncleanness, it could spread. It could defile that which was clean. Anything that was related to decay or death, that was unclean. And last week we talked about leprosy in a person's skin. But as the chapter continues, it becomes clear that a leprosy could affect non-living things too, like garments, or we'll get to some dwellings in chapter 14. Now, what in the world is that about? You know, we understand diseases of the body, but how can a garment become diseased? The official sickness known as leprosy is what we call in modern times Hansen's disease. And Hansen's disease cannot infect a fabric or a building. But in Leviticus, the word leprosy means more than just one specific disease. It's a whole category of conditions that appear on the skin or on the surface of something, and it reveals a contamination or a corruption that has developed within. Even in the case of leprosy in people, if medical doctors have studied Leviticus 13 and 14 and looked at the symptoms that are listed there, and it's not all just Hansen's disease variety of leprosy. There are several different kinds of skin conditions that are included in this category, if you will, of leprosy. The commonality was that it was some visible sign on the outside of a deeper spreading infection. And in that way, really anything could develop a leprosy. In garments and dwellings, probably it referred to some kind of a fungus or a mold that had developed and began to spread. And when you think about it, those are also signs of death, aren't they? Death and decay. If you open your refrigerator and you find that some leftovers have developed a layer of something greenish, something reddish. It has molded. Corruption has set in. And the fungus is now feeding on the decay. It's feeding on that death. And as we know, mold spores and things, if you ingest them, if you breathe them, that can be very hazardous to people's health. The Lord wanted to cultivate in his people a mindset of being clean, just staying clean. Spiritual cleanliness, of course, is paramount, but the mindset itself was intended to trickle down into every part of their lives. They're always to be thinking about it, about putting a difference between clean and unclean. And anything unclean, be on the lookout for it, because it could defile you. And so they're just be thinking about this. When you sit down to eat, is that something clean or is that something unclean? On your body, have you been keeping yourself clean, or have you come in contact with something that is unclean? Your condition of your home, all of it. Anything unclean, anything rotten, corrupted, it's not in line with God's design for the world. God made all things good. And in God's good design, things are alive and flourishing and whole. Anything that parts from that design was unclean. And so it was to be purged out. The Israelites would use a variety of different kinds of fabrics and materials. And during their wilderness wanderings, these garments were not just used as clothing, but their tents as well. I mean, they're using fabrics. They're using these materials for their dwelling places also. And so this law, it includes really any kind of material. He said if it's wool, if it's linen, if it's woven, if it's leather, whatever it's in, this applies. And so they're to be vigilant. They're to watch out for any strange discoloration in these materials. If there was a spot that was turning greenish or reddish, it was possibly a contaminating mold, a leprosy in the material. And at the end of verse 49, it talks about how the Israelites were to bring this to the priest for examination. Why the priest? Well, because this is something that affects everybody in the whole camp. This was not just for health precautions. If this was just about you being healthy, beware of mold and things, he would give these kind of stipulations, and then you just take care of it, right? But no, we got to involve the priest, because this is a matter of ceremonial cleanliness. This is something that impacts your access to God. That's how serious that this was. If they were not careful, that uncleanness could spread into the rest of the camp. It could make them unfit to be in God's presence. And so the priest would take it, and he would discern whether that spot were spreading or not. He'd take it, and he would take note of where it was seemed to be affected in the fabric, and then he would put it away for 7 days. And verse 51 says, "And he shall look on the plague the seventh day, and if the plague be spread in the garment, either in the warp or in the woof or in a skin or any work made of skin, the plague is a fretting leprosy. It is unclean." The word fretting is kind of interesting. In the Hebrew, it means something bitter or irritating or painful. Webster's 1828 dictionary defines fretting as something corrosive. I think that's a good way to think about the word, that it's something corrosive that spreads. It's an infection that will continue to just eat away at whatever it is on. When I think of something corrosive, I think of rust. Think of spotting a place of rust on the wheel well of your vehicle or something. And once there's rust, man, that is hard to get rid of. You can try to paint over it, but that doesn't get rid of the rust. It continues to chew and to corrode and to spread. It not only makes the vehicle more unsightly, it just keeps eating away. The rust is like a fretting leprosy on your vehicle. That's literally what that means. Of course, the big difference is the rust on your car isn't hazardous to your health, and it doesn't affect your relationship with God. Aren't you thankful for that? Minnesotans and North Dakotans and salt rust all over our vehicles. But leprosy in a garment, that was a real threat in both those ways. So if after 7 days the mold had spread, the whole garment was deemed unclean, it was thrown into the fire, it was destroyed. But if those 7 days went by and they brought it out and it had not spread at all, then they were to wash that garment thoroughly and set it aside for 7 more days. If washing didn't get rid of it and it still had the same discoloration, the end of verse 55 says, it is unclean. Thou shalt burn it in the fire. It's fret inward. Like washing, if it wasn't something there, washing it thoroughly a couple times and waiting, it should have cleared up somewhat by now. And so there's a deeper problem. It's fret inward. Burn it. But if they washed it and they waited for 7 days and the spot had kind of faded, it was darkened somewhat, then it was possible the material could be salvaged. They would cut out that affected part and sew it up or sew in a new patch over where it was. And if it didn't turn up again, that whole material was clean. That was great. Wash it one more time. It's good. It's fit for regular use. But if it popped up again, after you've cut it out, after you've weighed it, and all of a sudden, boom, there it is again. It showed up there. It's spreading. Verse 59. Let's see. Verse 58. And the garment, either warp or woof, or whatsoever thing of skin it be, which thou shalt wash, if the plague be departed from them, then it shall be washed the second time and shall be clean. This is the law of the plague of leprosy in a garment of woolen or linen, either in warp or woof or anything of skins, to pronounce it clean or to pronounce it unclean. Now, you're probably eager to get to a little bit of practical application on this, and we're going to, because I think you understand my purpose here tonight. You didn't all come from wherever you came to become experts on identifying molds in fabrics, right? You can find that probably on YouTube someplace. So there's something else here. But I need you to stick with me just a little bit more, because we're gonna chew on some more stuff here in chapter 14. In chapter 14, it looks ahead to how Israel would soon be living once they got to the land of Canaan. Their dwellings would no longer be made of fabric and leather. Soon they would be in houses made of stone and plaster. So we're looking now to verse 33 of chapter 14. The problem was the same type of a corrosive contamination could follow them there even in the promised land, and they needed to know how to apply these principles in that new setting. Verse 33 of chapter 14 says, And the Lord spake unto Moses and unto Aaron, saying, When ye be come into the land of Canaan, which I give to you for possession, and I put the plague of leprosy in a house of the land of your possession. And he that owneth the house shall come and tell the priest, saying, It seemeth to me there is, as it were, a plague in the house. Then the priest shall command that they empty the house before the priest go into it to see the plague, that all that is in the house be not made unclean. And afterward the priest shall go in to see the house. So if there was a suspicion of an unclean, moldy patch in the house, everything had to be pulled out. Because if the environment is unclean, it threatens everything in that environment to be made unclean as well. And that's going to be important. That's going to be an important thing to remember, is that the condition of what is around you is critical. What is near you will soon be upon you and then will be in you. So pay attention to what your environment is like. Pay attention, it affects you. Verse 37. And he shall look on the plague, and behold, if the plague be in the walls of the house with hollow strakes, greenish or reddish, which in sight are lower than the wall, or if it seems to be like it's not just like on the surface, but it's in there, it's receded deep into the wall. Verse 38, then the priest shall go out of the house of the door to the door of the house, and shut up the house 7 days. And the priest shall come again the 7th day, and shall look, and behold, if the plague be spread in the walls of the house. So this is very familiar. It's the same thing they would do if it was a person that was suspected of leprosy, or a garment that might have a leprosy in it, or a house that has it. You take note of it, you shut it up, and you put it away for 7 days. You watch and you wait. You pay attention and you check to see whether it is spreading. If it's a garment material and it didn't spread, the prescription was cut it out, right? Cut that piece out, get rid of that, put in something new in its place. Basically, you're to do the same thing with the house. Look at verse 40. Then the priest shall command that they take away the stones in which the plague is, and shall cast them into an unclean place without the city. And he shall cause the house to be scraped within round about. And they shall pour out the dust that they scrape off without the city into an unclean place. And they shall take other stones and put them in the place of those stones. And he shall take other mortar and shall plaster the house. You know what you've done? You have cut out the infected area and you have repaired it. You have patched in with new what was corrupt. Then you keep an eye on it. You watch it for a while. You don't move right back in. You take some time. You evaluate. Verse 43, and if the plague come again and break out in the house, after that he hath taken away the stones, and after that he hath scraped the house after it is plastered, then the priest shall come and look, and behold, if the plague be spread in the house, it is a fretting leprosy in the house, it is unclean. Now, if that had been a piece of fabric, if that had been leather or a woven material, at that point, it's like, you're not saving it, burn it. But you can't burn a stone structure. You can char it, but it's not gonna burn, right? And so, but you do basically the equivalent. You destroy it, verse 45. And he shall break down the house, the stones of it, and the timber thereof, and all the mortar of the house, and he shall carry them forth out of the city into an unclean place. But if you took that first option and you tore out that infected area and it never spread, and it didn't pop up anymore, and it didn't show up, then the house didn't have to be destroyed. That's verse 48. If the priest shall come in and look upon it, behold, the plague hath not spread in the house. After the house is plastered, then the priest shall pronounce the house clean, because the plague is healed. At that point, they would perform a ritual over the house to reconsecrate it, basically, to show that it had been cleansed and that it was now fit to live in again. And what's interesting is the exact same ritual that was done to reconsecrate a leper who had been healed. So a person. And so to review that, they'd take 2 birds, right? And they would go to a place with running water, and they would kill one of the birds and put its blood in the bowl, along with some cedar and some hyssop and some some scarlet wool, and they would put that in there, and then they would sprinkle it on the leper who was being cleansed. Well, in this case, they'd sprinkle it on the house. They'd put blood on that house. And then they would dip the living bird in that concoction, take him to an open field outside the city, and let him go free. And it was like he was bearing that contamination and taking it away out of the city where it would not affect anyone anymore. And the house was then declared cleansed. It's fit to live in, verse 57. This is about to teach when it is unclean and when it is clean. This is the law of leprosy. How we doing? Doing all right with a little teaching? Okay. These laws that we're talking about tonight, they're of course directly connected to what we discussed last week regarding leprosy in a person. We showed how that leprosy is it was like this living death. The person was technically still alive, but their body was like decaying while they lived. It's very representative of the way sin works in a person's life. That it takes over, and sin is corrosive, isn't it? It spreads. It continues to take over more and more of a person's life. And in this section, we're reminded that sin does not only affect people. When mankind sinned, the effects of sin swept over all of creation. All of the world that God had made to be good fell under the curse of sin. And so now we live in a world where decay and death, they're realities that we have to contend with because of the curse. Sinful defilement, it's an ever-present danger in this world that we live in. If you are around that which is unclean and defiling, it's eventually going to get on you and in you. So think about what these represent in our lives. This is the part of the service you were waiting for. Some application here. Garments. Garments show up as a metaphor for our conduct and our habits, especially when you get into the New Testament. The Apostle Paul writes in Ephesians 4:22 that ye put off, that's kind of like take off this old garment, put off concerning the former conversation, the old man, which is corrupt, he says. It's rotten according to the deceitful lusts, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind, and that ye put on the new man, which after God is created in righteousness and true holiness. Isn't that interesting? It's like your old lifestyle, your habits, your choices, your conduct. The old you've got to take it off, put it away from you, be renewed in the spirit of your mind in the scriptures, and then put on a new kind of life that is not corrupt anymore, but that is holy. That's how it's supposed to work. There is this subtle lie that we can tend to buy into that separates who we are from what we do. Okay? Who we are and what we do. It's kind of like, I'm good with God, even though I have all of these habits that are unclean in my life. It's like, no, you are what you do. And you do what you are. Whatever behavior you put on, whatever choices you're making, it's directly impacting the kind of person you're becoming. It's in contact with you. You can't separate all of that. If you're doing unclean, defiling things, you'll be an unclean, defiled person. How do you separate that? And that will take you away from God. That's what unclean does. That's what unholy means in Leviticus. It means you don't have access like you did before. The defilement is on you. You're not qualified to be close to God's presence. You got to get clean first, and you've got to be consecrated and become holy in your life. That's what holiness and cleanness, that brings us closer to God. And uncleanness takes us farther away. So we have to take this seriously to evaluate our lives and to identify and remove any rot that is there. Any kind of sinful corruption that is in our lives, you have to ruthlessly cut it out. You've got to amputate that habit out of your life and replace it with that which is good and wholesome and that is not defiling. And listen, if that cutting out doesn't do it, then you've got to take more drastic action, even beyond that. Think about with me the world that we live in of smartphones and electronic devices and so on. There are things on our electronics that can lead to defilement. You'd better remain watchful. You'd better stay vigilant. If you find yourself in an app or a site that's got some rot in it, cut it out immediately. Cut it out. I'm saying delete that. Delete that app. And that rot, man, it can come in so many forms. Obviously, there's immodesty on the internet. There's lustful temptation there. But there's also all kinds of advertising and that's tempting you to spend money that you do not have on things that you do not need, screaming at us with all kinds of worldly news designed to get you riled up, that's not a fruit of the Spirit, being all angry about what's happening in the world. But that's a temptation there. That's a rot that is in all of this. It can be, you can get on there and you can start looking at other things. You can be looking at houses that are out there. And the more houses you look at, the more discontent you get with the home that God has given you. It can be a social media site that makes you think everybody else has a better life than I've got. It can be an addicting video game. It can be a TV show that keeps you from paying attention to the real people in your life. It can be a kind of music that you're listening to that your flesh really enjoys, but you know it's full of worldly defilement, and yet in your mind you're thinking, I can listen to this that is defiling, and I can still be right. No, it's a garment that's touching you. It's defiled, and what is near you will get on you, and then it will get in you. Dangerous contamination from the world can pop up anytime, anywhere. And you'll probably try in your flesh, if you're like me, you'll try to convince yourself, oh, that's no big deal. I've got this under control. Just scroll past it, good to go. But whatever help you think that's giving you, whatever escape that it offers, whatever entertainment that it gives to you, it's not worth wrapping yourself up with leprosy. So get rid of it. Delete it. Delete your account. Remove the app. Gone. Lose the bookmark to that website. Cancel that streaming service. Shut off the cable if you need to. If you see something that's infected with rot, cut it out. Get it out of your life. Why are you still entertaining that? If you can manage to salvage the phone or the TV or whatever it is, and you find that you are able to use it in a balanced and a wholesome way, then that's great. Wonderful. Use it. But stay wary that old temptation of leprosy should show its head again, and it threatens to get in the way of God's fullest blessings in your life. But if it keeps happening, keeps popping up, it keeps spreading, that's pretty much the definition of a fretting leprosy. It's fretting. It's corroding. It's continuing to spread. It'll continue to spread until it hurts you, until it hurts your family, and it's not worth it. Don't allow it to be there. I know that in this modern era, it has become a real challenge and a serious inconvenience to try to get by without all of these modern conveniences that we have, without all of these electronics and smartphones. They've become so attached to us. It's almost like it's part of the body, It's always at hand, it's in the pocket, it's within arm's reach at all times. It's like part of yourself. It's like, how can I let this go? But you know what Jesus said? He said, and if thy right eye offend thee, pluck it out and cast it from thee, for it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, not that thy whole body should be cast into hell. You don't want everything contaminated. And you're like, but it's like it's part of me. It's my right hand. And if thy right hand offend thee, cut it off. Cast it from thee. That would be more profitable for you. Burn it. That's what he said to do with the garments. That's how serious sinful defilement is. We must be ruthless with it. Remove the contaminate your life. You've got to intentionally put off the old man and be renewed and put on the new man. New life, new behaviors. Then I would say that if the garments have to do something with our outward actions and our behaviors, then the house can represent our environment. and our influences. You may think and evaluate that you're doing just fine spiritually, but what I want you to do tonight is not just to evaluate your heart condition at this moment, evaluate your environment. Is there anything or anyone around you that is having a negative spiritual effect on you, that could cause you to grow distant from God, that could weaken your spiritual defenses? Think about your environment. And before I get into more of a spiritual side of this, think about the literal condition of your home for just a moment. I think we should get there's a very practical side of Leviticus as well. What kind of environment is your living space? Does your home reflect that which is clean and ordered and good and useful? These are the kinds of things that reflect God's nature, the way He is. Or is it a place of chaos? Is it disordered? Is it filthy? Is it practically unusable because of neglect? That is not consistent with a clean, holy life. It's just not. A cluttered space is evidence of a cluttered mind. I didn't get a lot of amens on that. That chaos, my friend, is not just around you. It's proceeding from within you. It is. It's a reflection of what's on the inside. And that works both ways, by the way. Meaning, if you want to start calming the chaos in your mind and in your life, you quite literally can get started with that by doing some house cleaning. Yep, you're bringing your environment into order. And that discipline carries over. And you'll find it easier to clean house in your soul as well. Bringing order to your environment can help your life. What about some other environmental influences around you, though, in more of a spiritual way? What's your workplace like? Does it vex your soul every day? Maybe you can do something about it, maybe you can't in the immediate. But it's certainly something to be watchful of and to pray about and say, Lord, this environment I'm in, it's affecting me. Be vigilant about that. What about the places you go? Where do you take yourself? Where do you go and spend time? You might be able to, legally, without sin, go sit down at the bar and enjoy a Coke. But that's not the kind of an environment where a Christian ought to be. What kind of people do you spend time with? Because the people you're close to, they're part of your environment. They're affecting you. 1 Corinthians 15:33 says, "Be not deceived," which means it's probably easy to be deceived about this. "Be not deceived. Evil communications corrupt good manners." Corrupt, it rots it. What's communications? Evil communications? Communications means companionship. Evil companionship is a rot to good manners. What's good manners? Good manners is the Greek word ethos. It means a customary abode, a dwelling place. Isn't that interesting? We're talking about dwellings in the Old Testament, and your good manners are your character. It's your morals. It's where you live. It's your default. So, in other words, the company you keep is continually shaping your character. Amen? It is shaping your character. So what kind of friends do you have? What kind of friends do your kids have? You'd better know. You'd better keep an eye on who's helping shape their character. Guard the environment. Be watchful of the influences to guard your heart. And when you identify some rot anywhere in your environment, take it seriously. Remove that rot. Cut that out of your life. Because you can't be in and around uncleanness without it contaminating you. It's going to happen. Look at chapter 14 and verse 46. Verse 46, it says, "Moreover, he that goeth into the house, all the while that it is shut up, shall be unclean until the even." You go into this unclean house, and you dwell there, and you sleep there, you're unclean. It gets on you. And so you've got to remove it from around you, or remove yourself from around it. But if you don't put distance between you and that corruption, it's going to put distance between you and God. That's what this is all about. The beauty of holiness is that it brings you close to God. It's proximity to the Lord. It's relationship with God. And if you've got some rot in your life, it is, I promise you, pulling you away from God. So get rid of it. Now, this principle is true in a lot of different layers. I think it's true for societies. I think it's true for institutions. I think we're seeing it lived out right now in Washington, D.C. It's pretty obvious to everybody that our government agencies and bureaucracies are full of rot. And I got to be honest with you, frankly, I'm thrilled to see a lot of that getting gutted and purged and stones removed and plaster scraped, and away it goes into an unclean place. Get the rot out. Because honestly, it's the only chance our country's got of being salvaged. It's got to be done. When sinful defilement can crop up in a church, it requires that same sort of vigilance. You've got to remove it before it spreads. Paul spoke of a man in the church of Corinth living in this open, unrepentant, sinful relationship. And he told the church they needed to remove him immediately. And he said, "Know ye not that a little leaven leaveneth the whole lump? Purge out, therefore, the old leaven." And then he wrote this, but now I have written unto you not to keep company. If any man that is called a brother be a fornicator, or a covetous, or an idolater, or a railer, or a drunkard, or an extortioner, with such an one know not to eat. Therefore put away from among yourselves that wicked person. Get the rot out. Now bring that down to your life. If there is a toxic, spiritually corrosive influence going on in your life, you've got to deal with it. You need to root it out. Or at least you've got to put some distance there and keep it from contaminating you. If there's a sinful influence that's found its way into your home, into your family, and it's pulling you apart, because that's what sin does. Sin separates from God, from one another. It causes division. If it's hindering you spiritually, take action. Do not just ignore it because it's going to be a fight. Have the hard conversations. Deal with the problem, or it's going to continue to get worse. The sinful defilement of the world can pop up anywhere, anytime. It can show up in your life. It can show up in your church. It can show up in your kid's school, or in your phone, in your home. Don't neglect it. Watch for it. I heard Brother Prater say one time that some problems in life are like puddles and some are like leaks. When it comes to a puddle problem, just leave it alone, because the more you stir it up and mess around with it, the messier it becomes. But if you've got a leak in your house, you can't neglect that. That's just going to keep getting worse the longer that you leave it alone. And what we all need is we need God's wisdom to know which is which. And there is some wisdom that's here in Leviticus in not just rushing into things and fixing everything, when it might clear up on its own. If you give it a little bit of time, a little bit of space. The priest would take a week and he'd watch and see, is this spreading? And so I think it's good that we know the difference, and we know when it's time to be patient and watch, or when it's time to step in and take some aggressive action, because this worldly rot has taken root and it's growing and it's just getting worse. So here's the thought tonight. Here's the message. Let's get our lives cleaned up. Let's get it cleaned up. Clean up your home. Literally, clean your home. Let it be a good, wholesome environment and a good testimony to others. And then clean up your home spiritually. If there's something defiling in there, get it out. Get rid of it. Throw it away, burn it, purge your house of that thing. Get that stuff out. Do not keep it around. It's time to clean house. Clean up your phone. Clean up your computer. If you need to, get rid of them. Sometimes they're just not worth it. Clean up your music and your movies. It's amazing that if you clean up what's going into your ears and into your eyes, you'd be surprised how quickly it cleans up your mouth and cleans up your mind. Watch what's coming in, because it's coming into you and it's affecting you, and it'll come out in your life. Clean up your habits. Get some godly discipline about you. Clean up your friendships and your influences. Once in a while in life, you got to cut some people out. You just do. You got to put distance there. You got to let them go. And often, we can get this idea like, I'm helping them. Probably you're not helping them as much as they're hurting you. Because influence works both ways, my friend. If you are close enough to be exerting influence on somebody else, they are close enough to be influencing you as well. It's a two-way street. So be careful. Watch out. One bad apple spoils the bunch. So has the Holy Spirit pointed out some area of life that needs to be cleaned up tonight? Then let's get started now. Let's get started with our invitation time. Make some decisions, and then we'll go home and put it into action. Stand to our feet, and we'll have that time of response right now. Father,